Rain tapped softly against the wide glass windows of Skyline Aerotech, one of the most powerful aviation companies in the country. Inside the massive hangar, engineers and executives rushed around preparing for a very important demonstration. A brand new experimental business jet sat in the center of the hangar like a sleeping giant. It was sleek, expensive, and incredibly difficult to fly. Today, the company's powerful CEO, Victoria Hale, was meeting a group of investors who wanted proof that her newest aircraft was ready for the market. But there was a problem. The company's test pilot had suddenly quit that morning after a heated argument. Victoria was furious. "We cannot cancel this demonstration," she snapped, her sharp heels echoing across the polished floor. "Do you understand how much money is on the line today?" Executives nervously avoided her eyes. Then someone said quietly, "Ma'am, maybe the maintenance crew can help check the systems again before the investors arrive." Victoria waved her hand impatiently. "Fine, just make sure nothing goes wrong." At the far corner of the hangar, a man in a worn gray jacket knelt beside the landing gear of the jet. His name was Daniel Carter. Most people in the building barely noticed him. To them, he was just another mechanic. But Daniel worked quietly with the focus of someone who truly understood machines. His hands moved carefully across the landing gear assembly as he tightened a bolt. A small photo peeked out of his wallet lying nearby. It showed a smiling 7-year-old girl, Daniel's daughter. He raised her alone, and every decision he made was for her. "Dad!" A small voice called from the hangar entrance. Daniel turned and smiled instantly. Little Emma ran toward him wearing a backpack almost as big as she was. "You finished school early again?" Daniel asked gently. Emma nodded. "My teacher said you could pick me up since it's raining." Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth and lifted her into a hug. "Looks like you're helping me at work again." Emma giggled. "I like planes." Before Daniel could answer, a sharp voice cut through the hangar. "Why is there a child in my facility?" The entire room went silent. CEO Victoria Hale stood nearby with 2 investors behind her. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Daniel. Daniel stood calmly. "I'm sorry, Mom. Her school closed early because of the storm. She'll stay with me quietly." Victoria crossed her arms. "This is not a daycare." One investor chuckled. Daniel nodded respectfully. "I understand. She'll sit over there." Emma quietly walked to a nearby chair with her coloring book. Victoria shook her head and turned away. "Maintenance staff," she muttered. But as she walked past the jet, one of the engineers suddenly rushed toward her. "Ma'am, we have a problem." Victoria stopped. "What now?" The autopilot calibration failed again. The jet won't stabilize during takeoff tests. The investors exchanged worried looks. "That means today's demonstration could fail." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Where is our test pilot?" "He resigned this morning." Silence filled the hangar. One investor sighed. "Well, I guess the demonstration is canceled." Victoria hated those words. Canceled meant losing millions. Her eyes scanned the room in frustration. Then she noticed something strange. Daniel was listening carefully, almost too carefully. Victoria scoffed. "You, mechanic." Daniel looked up. "Yes. You've been staring at that jet like you know something." Daniel wiped his hands calmly. "I was just listening." Victoria walked closer. "You think you understand aircraft systems?" Daniel hesitated. "I know a little." The investors smirked. Victoria laughed coldly. "Oh, really?" She gestured dramatically toward the jet. "Fine." Her voice carried across the entire hangar. "Fly this jet, then we'll talk." Laughter spread through the room. A mechanic flying an experimental aircraft? Ridiculous. Daniel looked at the jet, then at his daughter. Emma watched him with quiet curiosity. Victoria crossed her arms smugly. Well, Daniel spoke calmly. If I fly it, will the demonstration continue? The investors exchanged amused looks. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Daniel nodded. I am. Victoria stragd. Fine. Her voice turned sarcastic. If you can get that jet into the air and land it safely, I'll personally apologize. The investors laughed again. One whispered, this should be entertaining. But Daniel didn't react. Instead, he gently knelt beside Emma. I need you to sit with Mr. Lewis over there. Okay? Emma nodded. Are you flying the plane? Daniel smiled softly. Maybe. Emma whispered. I know you can. Daniel stood up. Then he walked slowly toward the jet. The hangar fell quiet. Engineers watched in confusion. Investors watched in amusement. Victoria watched with disbelief. A mechanic climbing into the cockpit of a $40 million jet. Ridiculous, or so they thought. But as Daniel settled into the pilot's seat, something about the way his hands moved across the controls suddenly made one engineer freeze. He leaned toward another and whispered, Wait, why does he look so familiar? Meanwhile, Daniel powered up the aircraft. The cockpit screens flickered to life. Outside, rain continued falling across the runway. Victoria spoke into the radio mockingly. Mechanic, you sure you know what you're doing? Daniel's voice came back calm and steady. Requesting permission for taxi. The control tower hesitated. Victoria es Mirkev. Granted. The jet slowly began moving toward the runway. Inside the hangar, dozens of people gathered to watch. The investors prepared to laugh. Victoria folded her arms confidently. But none of them knew the truth. Because Daniel Carter wasn't just a mechanic. Years ago, he had been one of the most elite fighter pilots in the world. And the moment the jet reached the runway, his past was about to reveal itself. Rain had grown, heavier by the time the jet rolled onto the runway. Inside the hangar, engineers, mechanics, and investors gathered near the giant windows, watching the unbelievable scene unfold. A maintenance mechanic was about to fly a multi-million-dollar experimental jet. Most of them expected a disaster. CEO Victoria Hale stood with her arms crossed, her expression calm but skeptical. Let's see how long this joke lasts, she said quietly. Beside her, one investor chuckled. 10 seconds. Another replied, I give him 20. Across the hangar, little Emma sat beside an older engineer named Mr. Lewis. She watched the runway through the glass with wide eyes. That's my dad, she said proudly. Mr. Lewis smiled politely, though he clearly didn't believe what he was seeing. Inside the cockpit, however, everything was different. Daniel Carter didn't look nervous. He looked focused. The moment the cockpit screens lit up, something inside him awakened. It had been years since he sat in a pilot's seat, but the feeling was still there. Muscle memory, instinct. His fingers moved across the controls like someone greeting an old friend. He checked the instruments one by one. Fuel levels, hydraulic pressure, navigation system. Then he noticed something. A small instability warning blinking on the autopilot system. Daniel frowned slightly. So that's the issue. He adjusted a few settings manually. Then he pressed the radio button. Control tower. This is test aircraft VX-9 requesting runway clearance. In the tower, the air traffic controller hesitated. He glanced at Victoria standing nearby. She shrugged. Let him try. The controller sighed. VX-9 runway is clear. You are approved for takeoff. Inside the hangar, the investors leaned forward with curiosity. The jet slowly turned and lined up with the runway. Rain splashed across the windshield. The runway lights glowed faintly through the storm. Victoria grabbed a headset so she could hear the radio communications. Her voice carried through the system. "Well, mechanic, the runway is yours." Daniel didn't react to the sarcasm. Instead, he whispered quietly to himself. "Let's see if I still remember." He pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared to life. The powerful twin turbines screamed as the jet began accelerating down the runway. Inside the hangar, the sound shook the windows. "Whoa!" one investor muttered. "That thing's moving fast." But suddenly, a warning light flashed on the cockpit panel. Autopilot stability failure. Daniel expected it. He switched the system to manual control instantly. Outside, the jet reached 120 knots. The aircraft began to shake slightly. Inside the hangar, one engineer panicked. "Something's wrong." Victoria leaned forward. "What is it?" "The stability system is failing. Without autopilot assistance, the aircraft will drift during lift." The investor's smiles disappeared. "Should we stop him?" But on the runway, Daniel remained calm. He pulled gently on the control stick. "Come on, steady." The jet reached 150 knots. Rain lashed the windshield harder. The aircraft began to sway slightly left. Inside the hangar, someone shouted, "He's losing alignment." But Daniel corrected it instantly with precise control. Then came the moment of truth. 180 knots.